Hi everyone, this is Matt, welcome back to my channel. So, perhaps you're a new PhD student, fairly new PhD student, or you're thinking about starting a postdoc and actually starting the academic treadmill. So, I do want to tell you a few things about it, about expectations for academia, for your life in academia, because there are quite a few things that I learned when I was a PhD student. But then many more, I realized many more things when I was a postdoc. So there are actually 8 things today that I want to mention to you. So obviously when you're a PhD student, you might very quickly realize that it is a beautiful job to be an academic, because you get to ask your own questions. You get to be a lot like a child, a curious child, asking questions and trying to figure out the answers. So I think that's really cool, and probably this is the only job, or one of the very few jobs out there that would allow you to ask your own questions and then give you money to answer them. Being academic means going to lots of conferences and traveling the world. So all in all, you can end up with a beautiful career where, first of all, it was really interesting and you get to travel the world a bit. So these are the things that I understood when I was a PhD student. However, later when I became a postdoc, there were quite a few more things that became clear to me. So let's start with the salary expectations first of all. So these are at least the salaries in the UK. So postdocs in general make 30 to 40,000 pounds a year. And then once they become PIs, principal investigators, they can make from 40 to 80,000 pounds a year. So I think all in all, these are quite good. These are quite good salaries once you become a PI, a principal investigator. However, this is all about being regraded. So a postdoc is on a grade, let's say, called grade 7. This is a salary grade number 7, and they are earning from 30 to 40,000 pounds. Now, once you reach the top of your grade, salary grade, which means you reached 40,000 pounds, then you will not automatically jump to the next salary grade and start earning more money. What you actually need to do is you need to apply for regrading, okay? And what happens at this point is that you need to prove to the university that for the last year or even 2 years sometimes, you've been working at a higher grade, okay? So each grade, so a postdoc grade and then a lecturer grade, which is the next one perhaps, have different expectations. So you need to prove that you've been meeting the expectations of the next grade for at least a year, which means you've been working essentially partially for free, only now after a year to be given the chance to get extra money, which I think is quite unfair, but this is how it works. So even once you become a PI, okay, there are different levels to it. So for example, in a lot of universities there are 4 levels. So there is a lecturer, then there is an assistant professor, associate professor, and then a full professor. So you don't automatically jump from a lecturer to assistant professor. Again, this takes regrading. You need to apply and prove that you've been meeting the requirement for an assistant professor for at least a year whilst being a lecturer. So that's how it works, and I think you really need to be aware of this. Once you become a postdoc, you need to start applying for grants as quickly as possible, because actually the majority of the grants out there are for early career researchers, which means for postdocs that finished their PhDs from 3 to 5 years ago. Okay, so realistically, to increase your chances, you'll need to start applying immediately to learn, how the grant application process looks like, how to write grants, and then hopefully, after 3 to 5 years, you will secure a grant. Now, if you're applying for money, and you have your own money, then this is brilliant, because then you can stay being a postdoc for longer if you want to, or you can start your own group. So if you're thinking of being a forever postdoc, and I know a few people who are doing this, right? They are actually postdocing for the last 15 to 20 years. And I know at least 4 people who are doing this. So it is possible. However, remember, these people are on contracts all the time, and they can't apply for their own funding anymore, because it's been too long since their PhDs, since their graduations. So what they need to do is they need to convince their principal investigator, their supervisor, every year or every few years to secure money for them. And usually if you're really good, that's possible, but it's quite difficult to, have just one project that will pay your salary for the next 3 to 4 years. So what ends up happening is that few principal investigators come together and they put you on multiple projects. So for example, 20% of your full-time employment will be on project A, 50% will be on project B, and 30% will be on project C, because they have pots of money and they can draw a little out of each of these pots to pay for your salary. But this means you will have to work on multiple projects. And when I was a postdoc, that was actually the case. So I was, instead of being just on one project, I was on 2 projects. One of them was related to my PhD, also of my interest. The other one wasn't, and I was only given this project to actually make up my full-time employment to 100%, right? So you can definitely expect that at some point. But let's say you apply for grants, you're successful, you got some money. There are 2 things that you can do here. You can stay postdoc, or you can open your own lab. To open your own lab, this means that actually you applied for a fellowship, and fellowships are these massive grants, at least £1 million, £1.5 million pounds worth each grant, right? So that's enough money to open your own lab, get a postdoc, get a PhD student, and run the lab for 5 years or so. So the problem with these grants is they are time limited. So once you have a grant, you have a host university that is willing to have you. You start your own lab in that university, you get yourself a postdoc and a PhD student, you can pay for your salaries, your own salary from that fellowship grant. But after 5 years, the money will be cut off, okay? Or maybe after 3 years or 7 years, depending on the grant. But either way, this money will be cut off. And throughout this time, these, let's say 5 years, you are able to do your research, ask your own questions, and you'll be expected to teach as well, but this will only take 10 to 20% of your time at most. So you can imagine that 4 days a week you will just focus on research, and 1 day a week you will focus on teaching, which I think is a very reasonable and nice balance to have. But nevertheless, after 5 years the money will run out, and what do you do next? Well, you need to make sure that you secure another fellowship. And a lot of academics say, oh, once you secure one, it's quite easy, doors open, and you can secure the next one. However, I know a few examples of people who didn't manage to secure a second fellowship grant after the first one, because even though the research was promising, it looked really good, unfortunately it didn't lead anywhere, or maybe the fashion within research has changed, and now there are different priorities, and that's something that you also need to consider, and actually I'll talk about it a little bit later, about writing grants itself. Right, so the fellowships are great, you get to do your own research, but they're time limited, and then it is not promised that you will definitely secure the next fellowship, and actually after 5 years you might be out of the job. On the other hand, if you don't like this, you might apply for lectureship positions. Lectureship positions are teaching positions with universities. You don't have to come with funding when you start these, but definitely it's good to prove to them that you can apply for funding, that you've been successful in the past, and that you have ideas for future, how to bring money to the university, how to get grants. However, if you become a lecturer, so you are on a lectureship, then actually 90% of your time is devoted to teaching and only 10% of time is devoted to research. So imagine, in a whole week you only have half of a Monday, 4 hours, to focus on research. And you might have a PhD student if you're lucky, and theoretically this is all the time you can spend on them and thinking about research. The rest of the time you need to spend thinking about teaching. But expectation to bring money to the university, to write grants and be successful is still there. So, it's very difficult to, to get grants if you only have half a day to spend on research, because, your PhD student needs to be trained, you need to produce data, you need to write papers, and then you need to publish these papers and get some data for the grants. So, it is quite a vicious cycle here, because you're not given enough time to do research, but you're expected, to do all the research to bring money to the university. And also, throughout the whole year, you're expected to spend about 3 to 4 weeks writing grants. Now, whether this is enough time or not, that's a different question. I'll talk about it a little bit later in this video. However, 3 to 4 weeks in a year is based on the idea that you will not take an annual leave, you will not take holidays. The moment you take holidays, you go away, you lose these 3 to 4 weeks that you had for writing grants. So what ends up being is that a lot of academics, when they take holidays, they don't just go away and travel, they actually take this time to write grants. So they go travel for a week, and then they will spend another week or 2 weeks within a year on their annual leave when they're writing grants. That's the sad truth of it. And only once you secure a grant, you can negotiate the time you can spend on research. So the default is 10% of your time to be spent on research. Once you secure some funding, for the time of this funding, you can negotiate 15 or 20% of your time to be spent on research, which is still not much more. But I think when you have 10% to start with, and when they double this, it just feels like something. But unfortunately, most of your time will be spent on teaching when you are on a lectureship. Also, when you're a lecturer, so you're on a lectureship or you're on a fellowship, you're a fellow, research fellow, either way, you will be expected to do some admin work. So for example, the scientific community will expect you to review papers. And actually I used to do this for my supervisors when they were too busy, when I was a postdoc. But the idea is that when you submit a paper, some people need to peer review the paper, experts in your field. And what happens is that one day you get in your email inbox a request to review a paper. And this is for free, this is something that you are expected to do. Well, you don't have to do it, but you are really expected to do it, because later, if you want to publish in this paper, they need to perceive you like an expert in the field, someone who does help them do all of these things. So really, when a research paper asks you to review a paper, you do this. So you spend few hours to review a paper, and you know what? You might spend few hours every week. Unfortunately, you might be getting papers every week to review them. So this is extra work that you need to do, that you need to consider. Also, you are going to be a personal tutor. And I'm sure when you were an undergraduate student, you had a personal tutor, but maybe you didn't realize how many personal tutees your supervisor had. And I'll just give you one example, which is an extreme example of my friend. When she was a principal investigator, she quit now. She had within 1 year 35 personal tutees, right? So there are 35 undergrads that she had to look after. She had to check the extra essays, meet with them, and discuss all sorts of academic problems. And maybe even if you were not a student that needed extra help, I can tell you that a lot of students do. And when I had my own tutees, when I was a personal tutor, I had only 8 of them because I was a postdoc. I was still given them, but I wasn't really supposed to have them, but my circumstances allowed me to have them, and on a precautionary level, I was only given 8, so much fewer than normally people would get. However, I got 8, and they still had issues. I still had to meet with them more often than I was supposed to, because they needed help with lectures, with understanding what they're supposed to do, what is expected of them. So it does take your time as well. And then finally, you need to write grants. Whether you're a postdoc, you're a lecturer, you're a fellow, you have to write grants. Now, at least in the UK, the success rate is 5 to 10% with grants. So you can easily expect that for 10 to 20 grants that you submit, only one of them will be accepted and you'll get money for it. So what ends up being is that people apply essentially the same grant again and again to different funding bodies, because it's really difficult to come up with new ideas. It's really difficult to just produce new data. So every time you're rejected, you rewrite the grant a little bit, you tweak it here and there, and you submit it again. And I've written few grants, and essentially we were all one grant, and we just keep changing them and then submitting again and again, and I think eventually after 4 years this grant was accepted. So it is really difficult, and you also need to be a bit lucky, and your research needs to be within fashion. So for example, if your research expertise is oncology, which is already a hot topic, there's a lot of money in oncology, this is great. This increases your chances for getting money. However, still within oncology, there are some types of cancer that are hotter than the others. And obviously, if you're applying for a cancer that is very popular, and there is a lot of research for it, research funding for it, then this means that you will definitely have also a lot of competition. A lot of people will be doing the same thing to try to tap into this pot of money, this large pot of money. If you're trying to work on something that is not that popular, then you'll still have some competition, but the pot of money will be much, much smaller. So the problem here is that you will be able to recycle your grant to fewer number of funding bodies than as if you were recycling a grant which is on a very hot topic that you could recycle to lots of different funding bodies. In all, remember that once you submit your grant is going to be checked by a few people, right, by few reviewers, and I can assure you that they can have very, very different opinions. So for example, I remember one of my grants was reviewed by 5 people, and 2 people thought that the grant was absolutely excellent, and they didn't have any comments, and they definitely wanted to let us do this research in the future. However, one reviewer thought it was completely rubbish and it wasn't fundable and we shouldn't be doing this, right? So you can have definitely polar opinions, and then the other 2 remaining reviewers were somewhere in the middle. However, because I had one reviewer that was so negative about it, then I didn't get the funding. So definitely, all in all, academic career can be beautiful. You get to act like a child, ask questions and get answers. Obviously, within the academic fashion, within what the funding bodies allow you to do. And you get to travel to conferences and meet lots of people, have so many super interesting scientific conversations and ideas. However, there are also so many other things that academics are expected to do, often for free. And this is why all the academics work extra hours, because even though they're expected to work 37.5 or 40 hours a week, it's just impossible to do all of this within these designated 40 hours. And they end up working evenings, very early mornings, weekends, and most of the academics I know started 6, 7 a.m. and they finish at 6 p.m. and then they spend a bit of Saturday and Sunday working as well, just to make sure that they're doing everything to stay on top, to do research, to teach, to get money in the future, to review all of these papers, make sure that all of their personal duties are happy, and so on. So there's so much to do, and it can be a very rewarding career, but I think you need to be aware of what it takes. So if you benefit from this content, please subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.